the air was heavy with the scent of decay. Not just of rotting bodies, but of a world that had collapsed overnight. One moment, people were lining up at coffee shops and school crossings, and the next, everything was drowned in screams. The virus moved fast, too fast for the government to react, too fast for people to understand what was happening. No one knew how it started. Some blamed a pharmaceutical lab breach, others whispered about a military experiment gone wrong. But by the time answers were demanded, the only thing left were echoes and the shambling dead. Miles Harper had seen the first signs weeks before the panic reached full scale. A former wilderness survival instructor, he had always trusted his instincts. When people started disappearing in his small Indiana town, and those who returned came back with blank stares and twitching limbs, he knew it was time to leave. Not for a day trip or a temporary escape, permanent. He loaded his truck with everything he could carry and drove north, avoiding main roads, ignoring news stations that repeated the same stay indoors message until they went dark. He wasn't alone for long. On the third day of his trek, while taking shelter in a boarded-up sporting goods store outside of Toledo, he encountered Jasmine Clark. A sharp-witted paramedic with a busted lip and a splattered uniform, she didn't ask questions, she just aimed her pistol at him and said, "If you're bitten, say so now." He wasn't, and neither was she. It took them less than an hour to realize they needed each other. He had gear and caution. She had knowledge of wounds, shock, and how to calm someone teetering on the edge of hysteria. Together, they were stronger. By the end of week 1, their numbers grew. Devin Brooks, a quiet but deadly ex-Marine who had been holed up in an abandoned fire station, joined after saving them from a pack of roamers, zombies who traveled in loose groups, drawn by sound and scent. Then came Lila Monroe, a college student who had watched her dorm fall to the infection but escaped with nothing but a hunting bow and the will to live. Last was Hank Avery, a retired electrician with a cynical sense of humor and a knack for rewiring anything, especially when it involved gates, traps, or jury-rigged distractions. This strange band of survivors found an uneasy rhythm. By the second week, they had settled in a remote campground near Lake Erie. It was elevated, easy to defend, and surrounded by water on 3 sides, something the Undead didn't seem fond of. At night, they took turns on watch. During the day, they scavenged for supplies in nearby ghost towns, avoiding areas too dense or too quiet, because the quiet ones were often the worst. The infected didn't sleep. They didn't wander aimlessly. They waited. One such moment came late one night when Devin, usually reliable, fell asleep at his post. The group awoke to the sound of groaning and fingernails on the outer fencing. Dozens of the dead were circling their camp, drawn by a smell none of them could identify. The horror was in their eyes, not just their mouths. Milky white, yet searching. It was Jasmine who acted first, dousing a line of firewood in gasoline and lighting it, creating a wall of flames between them and the breach. The fire worked, temporarily, but it also brought attention. From the nearby woods came the sound of more footsteps, faster, heavier. Not roamers. Not the usual sluggish, moaning things. These were different. Runners. A mutation, maybe. Or something new altogether. No one had seen them before. One vaulted the fence like a maniac, landing just feet from Lila. She didn't scream, she fired, the arrow hitting it square in the temple. But another followed. Then another. Hank screamed something about a trap, they'd been led here. Herded. But by what? The group was forced to flee. In the chaos, they lost their food stores and half their gear. Miles led them through the woods, down a ravine, and into an old maintenance tunnel connected to an abandoned highway project. There, in the damp blackness, they huddled, breathing hard, listening. The sounds outside eventually faded, but not completely. Somewhere above them, something was still moving. Not walking. Not shuffling. Watching. As the group sat in the dark, hearts pounding, Lila whispered the question none of them wanted to ask out loud: what if they're getting smarter? No one answered. And somewhere deep in the woods above, a single pair of eyes glowed faintly red in the darkness, before vanishing into the night. The air inside the tunnel was thick with moisture and mildew. Drops of water echoed down the concrete corridor, each one falling like a countdown none of them could see. Miles stood at the front, flashlight clutched tightly in one hand, machete in the other. The others were behind him, Jasmine pressing a bloody rag to Devon's arm, Lila watching their rear with her bow drawn, and Hank sitting slumped against the wall, catching his breath. No one spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't comforting, it was tense, calculated. As if the darkness itself was listening. Devon finally broke it, wincing as Jasmine tightened a bandage. That wasn't just a horde. They were organized. No, they weren't, Jasmine muttered. Zombies don't organize. They do now, Lila whispered, her voice barely above a breath. That one that jumped the fence, it looked right at me. Like it was thinking. Hank snorted. Thinking dead? Great. What's next? Zombie debates and elections. No jokes, Miles said quietly. Not this time. We got played. Something drew us out. They didn't just stumble on our camp by accident. Jasmine stood. So what now? We've got no food, limited ammo, and Devon's bleeding all over the sewer. It's not a sewer, Hank grunted, shining a small flashlight at the wall. It's a utility tunnel. Used to be part of a maintenance route before they abandoned the highway project. I remember this. These tunnels stretch for miles, maybe even under the city. That caught Miles' attention. You sure? I wired half this state before I retired. I'm sure. Miles turned to the group. Then we go underground. If the surface isn't safe, we use these tunnels to move. Stay out of sight. Find a new location. Somewhere we can fortify again. Devon struggled to his feet. If we're lucky, maybe we'll find a supply cache. Or survivors. If we're lucky, Lila echoed, though she didn't sound hopeful. They moved cautiously through the tunnel system. Their footsteps were muffled by the damp floor, and every sound seemed louder than it should have been. Twice they heard movement ahead and stopped, weapons drawn, but it was only rats. Still, none of them relaxed. The memory of those runners, those smarter, faster infected, was still raw in their minds. Hours passed. The tunnel split several times. Hank used markings on the walls to guide them, explaining the color-coded stripes and what they meant. Eventually, they came across an old maintenance outpost, just a small chamber with lockers, a cracked desk, and a rusted cot. Inside one of the lockers, Jasmine found several sealed military ration packs, a box of road flares, and a flare gun. Looks like someone else used this as a hideout once. Lila checked the desk drawers and found a torn notebook. Its pages were filled with frantic handwriting, lists of supplies, map sketches, and at the very end, a final message scrawled in thick black ink: they adapt. They follow light. We sealed the west entrance. If you're reading this, run. Jasmine read it aloud. The group fell silent again. They follow light? Devon asked. That's why they came to our camp. The fire. Or the lanterns, Lila added. Miles took the notebook and read the last page again. They adapt. That's what's bothering me. The virus didn't just spread, it's evolving. No virus evolves that fast, Jasmine said, shaking her head. Miles looked up. Unless it wasn't just a virus to begin with. That hung in the air, heavier than the damp tunnel around them. Before anyone could respond, a sharp metallic clang echoed from behind them. Then another. Footsteps, fast, echoing through the tunnels like thunder. Devin swore and raised his rifle. "They're down here." "Not possible," Hank muttered. "No way they got in." The doors were sealed. Lila spun toward the tunnel they'd just come from. "Unless they knew we came this way." Miles didn't waste time. "Run. We don't make a stand here, we'll be cornered." "Move." They bolted down the passageway, flashlights cutting through the darkness, footsteps slapping against concrete. Behind them, the sounds grew louder, faster. And above all, unnatural breathing. Not gasps. Not moans. Controlled, rhythmic. Like something was hunting. They came to another split. Miles made a quick decision, leading them left. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to move single file. They reached a rusted steel ladder that led up into the unknown. Miles climbed first and pushed open the hatch. Cool night air rushed in. A small service alley in the heart of a crumbled city met them, dark, still, and silent. They climbed out one by one. As Jasmine helped Hank up, Lila looked back down the tunnel. Something was standing there. Tall. Unmoving. Just beyond the flashlight's reach. It didn't rush them. It didn't moan. It simply raised its head, and with a disturbingly human motion, tilted it slightly to the side. And then it turned and walked back into the dark. The night air hit their faces like a cold slap, awakening every nerve. Miles stood at the edge of the alley, peering into the blackness beyond the tunnel's exit. Behind them, the hatch clanged shut, the faint echoes swallowed by the stillness. The city stretched before them, silent, ruined, and seemingly abandoned. Streetlights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows over broken cars and shattered windows. "This place, it's worse than the woods," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "No more tunnels," Miles said firmly. "We move fast, stay low. We need shelter before dawn." Jasmine scanned the horizon with her pistol raised, her paramedic instincts on high alert. "We need supplies, food, water, maybe medical gear. But the question is, where?" Hank, rubbing a stiff shoulder from the climb, pointed toward a distant building with a faded red cross painted on the front. "Hospital. Could be risky, but it's a place to start." Devin, still bandaging his arm, nodded. "Hospitals have supplies, and maybe other survivors. Worth a shot." They moved cautiously through the streets, every crunch of broken glass and every distant howl setting their nerves on edge. The city was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of debris in the wind. No distant groans or chittering footsteps like before, just silence. But silence had a way of making the hairs on your neck stand up. As they approached the hospital, the group noticed signs of recent activity. Tire tracks cut through the dirt and ash on the road, and a makeshift barricade had been built around the front entrance, planks of wood, metal sheets, and even some of the hospital's own gurneys. They were trying to keep someone or something out, or in, Jasmine observed, her eyes narrowing. Miles gestured for them to split up for a quick perimeter check. Lila and Hank circled around the east wing, while Devin and Jasmine cautiously made their way to the front doors. Miles stayed near the alleyway, watching their backs. Jasmine pulled out a crowbar and pried open the hospital's main entrance with a soft grunt. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a long corridor dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. The smell hit them instantly, sterile and faintly metallic, mixed with something worse, death. Inside, the hospital was a graveyard of abandoned equipment, overturned wheelchairs, and blood-stained walls. Their footsteps echoed sharply against the tile floor. Jasmine's eyes darted from room to room, scanning for threats or survivors. "Keep your guard up," she whispered, "this place could be a trap." They moved carefully, gathering supplies, canned food, bottles of water, and medical kits. Hank's eyes lit up when he found a tool room filled with wiring equipment and batteries. "This could help with the barricades or traps back at camp," he said. But their search was cut short. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upper floor, a metal door slamming shut with force. All 6 of them froze. Devin raised his rifle, and Miles motioned to move toward the stairs. The tension in the air thickened. They ascended slowly, each step heavy. The hospital's 2nd floor was darker, the emergency lights failing altogether. Flashlights became their only guide. At the end of a long hallway, they spotted a figure standing still in the doorway of what looked like a patient room. The figure was slumped, pale, and unmoving. Devin raised his rifle. "Wait," Lila whispered. "Look at the eyes." They were clear, not the cloudy white of the infected. The figure was a woman, alive, but breathing shallowly. Jasmine rushed forward, dropping her pistol to check her pulse. "She's alive, but barely." "Who is she?" Miles asked. "I don't know, but she's hurt bad. We need to get her out of here." Before they could react further, a low growl rumbled from behind them. The door at the far end of the hallway burst open, and a small group of runners, the fast, aggressive infected, charged. The survivors barely had time to react. Arrows flew from Lila's bow, rifles cracked, and fists connected with rotting flesh. In the chaos, Hank was shoved back against the wall, a runner's claw scraping his arm. He grunted but didn't fall. Jasmine kept working on the woman, murmuring reassurances. The fight was brutal and fast. The runners were relentless, but the group's combined skills kept them alive. Devin landed a headshot that sent one staggering backward, while Lila's precise arrow dropped another before it could reach them. After the last runner fell, the corridor was silent again except for heavy breathing. "We need to move, now," Miles urged. They carried the injured woman down the stairs and back into the street. As they reached the alley where they'd come out of the tunnel, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Name's Emma," she whispered weakly. I was with a group." Miles looked down at her, hope flickering behind his eyes. "Where are they?" Emma's eyes filled with fear. "Taken by something worse." Before she could say more, a faint growl rose from the shadows of the alley. The group spun around, weapons raised. Standing at the edge of the street was a figure unlike any they'd seen before. Taller than the others, moving with unnatural speed and precision. Its skin was mottled and torn, eyes glowing a deep crimson. The leader of the undead hunters. And it was coming for them. The figure moved like a nightmare come to life, swift, silent, and unstoppable. Miles took a step forward, gripping his machete tighter, muscles coiling for the inevitable fight. The others formed a tight circle around Emma, their newest and most fragile companion. Her eyes darted between the glowing creature and the group, panic threatening to overwhelm her. "That's no ordinary zombie," Devin muttered, fingers tightening on his rifle's grip. "No," Jasmine agreed, voice barely a whisper. "That's the hunter they mentioned in the notebook." The tall creature stepped into the flickering light, its features grotesque but disturbingly intelligent. Unlike the shambling dead they had fought before, this one's movements were calculated, almost predatory. It tilted its head, emitting a low, guttural growl that sent chills down their spines. Miles raised his machete and shouted, "Stay together. Don't let it separate us." The group tightened their formation, weapons raised, eyes fixed on the hunter. Lila notched an arrow, aiming carefully at the creature's head. But before she could release, it darted forward with a speed that made their heads spin. Lila fired. The arrow struck the creature's shoulder, but it barely slowed. The hunter closed the distance in seconds, swiping with a claw that sent Hank sprawling backward, blood spurting from a deep gash on his side. "Move!" Miles barked, slashing with his machete, but the creature ducked and countered with a swipe that left a shallow cut on his arm. Jasmine fired her pistol, the bullet grazing its chest, but it shrugged off the wound like it was nothing. Devin stepped up, blasting the hunter with a shotgun at point-blank range. The blast threw the creature back, crashing into a pile of rubble. For a moment, the group thought they had the upper hand. Then the hunter rose, unharmed except for the arrow lodged deep in its shoulder. It roared, a terrifying, guttural sound that echoed through the empty streets, and charged again. The fight turned brutal and chaotic. Miles and Devin coordinated attacks while Lila fired arrows with deadly accuracy. Jasmine tended to Hank's wound, but the pain was slowing him down. Emma huddled behind them, trembling but watching every move. The hunter seemed to anticipate their strikes, dodging and weaving like a skilled fighter. It was learning. Adapting. Miles realized then the terrifying truth: this wasn't just a zombie. It was a weapon, designed to hunt survivors. As the battle raged, a sudden explosion rocked the street, a hidden gas line ruptured, igniting in a fiery blast that threw everyone back. Flames licked the edges of the building, smoke choking the air. Amid the chaos, the hunter vanished. "Where'd it go?" Lila gasped, coughing. "Doesn't matter," Miles said grimly, wiping blood from his face. "It's still out there. And it's hunting us." Emma looked up at him, eyes wide. "They took my friends. The ones who barricaded the hospital, the ones who fought back. The hunter, it was sent to find survivors like us. To kill or capture." "Capture?" Jasmine echoed. "For what?" Emma shook her head weakly. "I don't know. But I heard whispers, on the radio, on the networks before they went silent. They're collecting people. For experiments. For control." Miles clenched his jaw. The nightmare was bigger than they thought. "We can't stay here," Devin said, grimacing as he supported Hank. "We need to keep moving." "But where?" Lila asked. "Everywhere is crawling with those things." Miles looked down the street, eyes narrowing against the smoke and firelight. "We find shelter. We regroup. And we fight back." As the flames climbed higher, the survivors disappeared into the maze of darkened streets, chased by the distant howls of the undead and the relentless, unseen hunter stalking their every step. The city had become a maze of shadows and danger, every alley and street a potential trap. Miles led the group through a labyrinth of crumbling buildings and deserted storefronts, their senses sharp as razors. The air was thick with smoke from the burning hospital, mingled with the distant groans of the undead. Hank leaned heavily on Devin, his wounds slowing him more than he admitted. Jasmine stayed close, offering quiet reassurances but constantly scanning the skies and rooftops for threats. Lila's bow was always ready, her eyes darting for movement in the darkness. Emma trudged along silently, clutching a small satchel filled with whatever little supplies they'd managed to scavenge. "We can't keep running," Miles said, breaking the silence. "We need a plan." "Where?" Jasmine asked. "This city's a death trap." Miles frowned. "I remember hearing about a place, an old military bunker on the outskirts of town. It was decommissioned years ago, but it might still have supplies and, more importantly, strong walls." Lila glanced up. "Sounds like a fortress. But how do we get there without running into that hunter or worse?" Carefully, Devin said, checking his ammo. "We move at night, use the shadows, and avoid the main streets." Emma suddenly stopped, pointing toward a flicker of movement on a rooftop. "Look!" They all froze, watching as a lone figure slipped across the rooftop, disappearing behind a broken chimney. It wasn't undead. It was human. Miles motioned for silence and led the group toward a narrow alley. Could be another survivor. Or worse, someone working with the infected. Jasmine raised her pistol, and they approached cautiously. As they reached the alley's mouth, a voice called out softly. "Wait! Don't shoot! I'm alone." The figure emerged, a young man, dirty and exhausted but unarmed. "My name's Caleb," he said, voice shaky. "I've been hiding here for weeks." Miles studied him, searching for signs of deception. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I was afraid, Caleb admitted. I've seen what those things do. But I know a way out, through the subway tunnels. They're still mostly intact and lead toward the bunker you're talking about. Hope flickered in the group's eyes. Subway tunnels meant cover, concealment, and a chance to avoid the undead hordes above. Why didn't you take the tunnels yourself? Jasmine asked. Caleb swallowed hard. Because something's down there. Something worse than the hunter. A chill ran through the group. Miles shook his head. We don't have a choice. We're running out of options. With Caleb leading, they slipped into the subway entrance, descending into the darkness. The air grew colder and damp, the walls covered in graffiti and the scars of neglect. The tunnels were eerily quiet. At first. Then came the faint sound of dripping water, footsteps echoing far ahead. Caleb held up a hand. We're not alone down here. The survivors tightened their grip on their weapons as they moved forward, each shadow a potential threat. Suddenly, a distant growl reverberated through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping concrete. Run! Miles yelled. The group broke into a desperate sprint, the sound of pursuing runners closing in fast. Lila fired arrows behind them, picking off a few of the infected, but they kept coming, fast, relentless. As they rounded a corner, a sudden collapse blocked their path. Dust and debris filled the air, and the group skidded to a halt. We're trapped, Devin said, panting. No way forward, no way back. Unless, Hank pointed to a narrow ventilation shaft just above their heads. I might be able to squeeze through and find another exit. Lila nodded. If you can get out, signal us. Hank crawled into the shaft, the space tight but navigable. Minutes stretched into agonizing silence as the others waited, surrounded by the snarling undead pressing closer. Finally, a faint whistle echoed from above, a signal. Follow me, Hank called. They climbed after him, emerging through a rusted grate onto a deserted rooftop overlooking the city outskirts. Ahead, the old military bunker loomed, solid, foreboding, and the best chance they had. But as they made their way toward it, Miles paused, eyes scanning the shadows. From the corner of his vision, he saw it again, the hunter. Watching. Waiting. This time, it didn't move away. It was ready to strike. The bunker stood like a grim sentinel on the edge of the wasteland, the last stronghold in a city swallowed by death. Miles led the group through the heavy steel doors, which groaned open after some effort. Inside, stale air and shadows greeted them, but so did something rare, a sense of safety. They moved quickly, securing the entrance with chains and barricades scavenged from nearby debris. Hank set to work reinforcing their defenses, while Jasmine and Lila inspected the interior, searching for supplies or clues. Emma sat quietly against the cold concrete wall, still weak but steadying herself. Devin tended to Hank's wound again, knowing it was worsening but hiding his concern. Miles gathered the group. We've got a roof over our heads and walls that can keep the undead out. But that hunter, it's not just a mindless monster. It's hunting us because we're a threat. Why? Emma whispered. What do they want with us? No one knows for sure, Jasmine said. But if they're capturing survivors, experimenting on them, there has to be someone behind this. Devin frowned. We need answers. And a plan. Suddenly, a faint metallic noise echoed from deeper in the bunker, a slow, rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps. Miles raised his machete. Everyone, stay alert. The group crept down a narrow corridor toward the sound, tension thick in the air. As they rounded a corner, they found a room filled with old computer equipment, maps, and a dusty radio transmitter. Emma approached the radio and hesitated before flipping it on. The device crackled to life, static filling the silence. Then, a voice came through, cold, distorted, and unmistakably human. Survivors, you think you can hide? You think you can resist? The voice sent a shiver down their spines. Miles stepped forward. Who are you? What do you want? Control, the voice hissed. Order. The hunter is only the beginning. Soon, the city will be ours. Those who resist will be purged. Those who comply will serve a new purpose. The line went dead. Jasmine turned off the radio. They're organized. More than just infected. This is a coordinated effort. Experimenting with the virus, Devon added grimly. Creating hunters, capturing survivors for who knows what. Lila clenched her fists. We can't let them win. Miles nodded. We won't. But that means we fight smart. Over the next hours, the group fortified the bunker, setting traps and organizing supplies. They took turns keeping watch, every shadow a potential threat. But sleep was a luxury none could afford. Just before dawn, the alarms, makeshift tripwires rigged by Hank, were triggered. The hunter had found them again. This time, it wasn't alone. From the darkness outside, dozens of infected surged toward the bunker's walls. The survivors sprang into action, arrows flying, bullets cracking, and blades flashing in the low light. The bunker shook with the impact of bodies battering its defenses. Miles met the hunter face to face in the chaos, their weapons clashing with sparks. The creature was stronger, faster than ever, fueled by something beyond the virus. It growled, slashing with claws that could tear steel. But Miles held firm, landing blow after blow. Behind them, the others fought desperately to hold the infected at bay. In the final moment, Miles drove his machete into the hunter's chest. The creature howled in fury and staggered back, but instead of dying, it smiled, a cruel, terrifying grin, and vanished into the shadows. The survivors were left breathless but alive. Miles looked around at his ragged team. This fight isn't over. They want us for something. We need to find out what, and stop it. Emma stood, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. Then let's make sure they never get that chance. The bunker was no longer just a shelter, it was the battleground for humanity's last hope. The survivors knew what was coming. The enemy was organized, relentless, and willing to sacrifice everything to achieve control. Miles gathered the group in the dim light of the command room, maps and radios scattered around them. We've learned enough. The hunters are part of a larger plan, an experiment to create perfect soldiers from the infected. But it's flawed. They're unstable, and that means they can be stopped. Emma nodded, clutching her satchel. We've got to destroy their base of operations. If we don't, this nightmare will never end. The others exchanged grim looks. There was no turning back. With careful planning, they prepared to infiltrate the main facility, a high-security compound rumored to be just beyond the city's edge. It was where the experiments were conducted and where the hunters' creators awaited. As night fell, the survivors moved like shadows, avoiding patrols and infected alike. Lila's arrows silenced enemies before alarms could be raised. Devon and Miles worked in tandem, covering their backs. The closer they got, the more intense the feeling of dread grew. The compound was surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, and surveillance drones, technology and death intertwined. Emma hacked into the security system with shaky fingers, opening a side gate just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside, the smell of chemicals and decay was overpowering. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, revealing rows of cells and strange machinery humming ominously. They moved swiftly, guided by fragments of information Emma had gathered from intercepted transmissions. Suddenly, alarms blared. The base was on high alert. "Run!" Miles shouted. The group sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors as soldiers and hunters closed in. They reached a massive control room where servers blinked with ominous activity. "We need to shut this down," Jasmine said, rushing to the main console. Emma worked frantically to override the system while the others held off waves of attackers. Outside, the hunter appeared once again, its red eyes blazing with fury. This time, it was alone, but more dangerous than ever. Miles met it in the center of the room, blades flashing. The fight was brutal, metal against flesh, strategy against raw power. The hunter's strength was immense, but Miles's determination was stronger. With a final, desperate strike, Miles plunged his machete into the hunter's heart. The creature let out a chilling scream before collapsing into a lifeless heap. Emma's fingers flew over the keyboard. "I'm shutting it down now." The machinery powered down, lights dimmed, and a siren faded into silence. Outside, the infected began to falter, their movements slowing as the control signal ceased. The survivors looked at one another, battered but victorious. "This isn't the end," Miles said, voice steady. "But it's a start." As dawn broke over the ruined city, the group stood together, survivors against all odds, ready to rebuild and resist whatever came next. Their journey had been terrifying, brutal, and uncertain, but their will to survive had never wavered. The amazing journey of these survivors wasn't just about fighting the undead, it was about refusing to give up, no matter how overwhelming the odds.